What's up, adventurers? And welcome to the shop. Today we are getting into a viewer question I had. I saw this question about a saw I was using in a video and thought we'd answer it. Sorry. Do you know when a joke becomes a dad joke? When it's apparent? Let's go. What's the differences between a Japanese style saw and a Western style saw? Just by looking at these two, right, you can see the big difference is the handle. The Japanese style saw, a much longer handle. It's meant for one or two hands, and it looks like something you'd be taking into battle. The Western style saw looks like something that's hanging up in your granddad's garage. Right? The Western style saw cuts on a push and a pull. The Japanese style saw cuts only on the pull. Before we get further, and we get a bunch of people on there like, oh, this is better, that's better. I don't think any one is better than the other. The Japanese style saw is my preferred saw. I have a lot of them. I prefer them. I use them. But that's because that's where I've put most of my effort and time into training with. I don't work a lot with Western style saws. Not to say I haven't used them. I grew up using these. I just, these days, don't prefer them. I'll tell you why later. Neither one is better than the other. It's what you're going to put your effort into. Take care of your tools. There's a metaphor in there. So, let's get into it. Let's go over the first biggest difference in a Japanese saw and a Western saw. The Western saw cuts on the push and the pull. Each back and forth cuts. The Japanese style saw cuts on the pull. We start it and we go down. The other big difference that I mentioned in the beginning of the Japanese saw versus the Western saw is the Western saw is meant for more one hand. It's more of a pistol grip. Whereas the Japanese saw, longer handle, it's meant for one hand or two hands. Now, I don't use Western saws enough to sit here and pretend to be a pro at telling you exactly the ins and outs of every Western saw. I've used them. I prefer my Japanese saws. So, there's the biggest difference between the Western saw and the Japanese saw. Now, we're going to get into a little bit of how-to, some tips and tricks, and some differences between the different Japanese saws. Because there's a few different kinds, man. And, I don't know, they're fun to learn about. So, let's go. So there's like three main styles of Japanese saws. And there's different variations of all of them, which is really cool. I'm going to go over a couple of the different ones, the three main. And then later in the video, I'll compare cheap to somewhat cheap to less cheap. And we can see how they cut differently and different uses. The thing I like most, I think, about the Japanese saws is they're so versatile. I feel like I can do so much more with one of these than with one of these. Again, this is where I put my effort. I don't put a whole lot of effort into this one, so that might be a contributing factor. But I know that when I'm doing housework or I'm trying to cut something up high or I'm remodeling, that reach is freaking great. Also, the leverage that I get off of these guys is huge. So, the first one we're looking at is the Ryoba. The Ryoba is a double edge. One edge is more aggressive, the other edge is fine. One is for ripping, one is for crosscut. Ripping, we're ripping a board straight down. Crosscut, right, we're cutting across the grain. This is meant for more of a fine cut, whereas the rip cut, it's going to be a little rougher. Okay? Ripping cut, I usually am going to use 2 hands on that pull. Whereas a cross cut, it's a little bit more fine, a little bit more finesse. You're using 1 hand. The next one, and I'm probably going to butcher these names. If you want to correct me in the comments, go right ahead. If you don't feel like correcting me, cool. Sit back, have a drink, enjoy the show. The next one is a dozakai, which a dozakai is it can be a cross cut or it can be a rip cut, and I'll show you that one here in a little bit. But it's got a spine on it. The cool part about the spine is there's very little flex. So if you're cutting a board that's maybe 1.5 inches or 2 inches thick, and you really want to keep that line going straight, right? That spine is going to keep that blade from bending. The next one is a kabate. Kataba. Again, I'm probably butchering it, but to me, it sounds like kataba. So, the next one is basically, again, it can be a rip cut or it can be a cross cut, but it has no spine. It's got a little bit more flex into it. Normally, you're going to find them as rip cuts. Why? Because this is meant for going through something much larger than what you might need something with a spine for. So maybe I'm cutting some timber, maybe I'm cutting some lumber, some raw material, and I'm trying to cut it down to size. This is probably what I would use, right? As I start to rip that down, because that spine is eventually going to meet the edge of the wood, and it's not going to be able to go any further. Whereas the kataba is going to go much deeper through. Okay, that's what she said. Lots of different variations. Now, let's look at the differences, because you can get one for like $10. You can get one for $70 and up. It's crazy, which I'm sure is the same with the Western saw. But again, I'm not a guy in the Western saw, so I'm not going to pretend. So let's look at the difference. All right, here's the fun part. As I show you the difference in the cutting, I'm also going to go over some tips and tricks, especially for you beginners out there, on how to keep your cuts straight and clean. Now, you're going to notice each cut has a difference in thickness. As you guys are cutting, with the push, that'll get your mark start. I like to use my thumb for just a little guide. That begins your cut. Now, you can start to hit that hole. Okay. Now we'll move over to the Kiri. We just use the Seozan. Again, thumb to line, a little push to get it going. And now we move over to the tank. This is the guy that we use for yard work and all kinds of stuff. The push, just to get that started. Now I have noticed, and this was told to me a while ago, as you're cutting, if you keep it more at around a 30-degree angle, you're going to have a lot easier time cutting through, right? Back and forth, rather than just going straight across and pulling your product back. Difference, especially in the cross cutting, between the cheap saw, the somewhat cheap saw, and the Suizan, which is a bit more expensive. Not as cheap. Affordable, just not cheap. A much cleaner cut. Not just that, but it's a much thinner cut. It's going to be more precise. It's going to be closer to the bone. These guys are going to rip through a little bit more. All right. There you go. That was just a couple of the basic differences between your Japanese saw and your Western saw, right? I want to do another video with the Japanese saws of more techniques on how to cut, what you're cutting, one hand versus two hand, ripping versus cross cutting, things like that. Little projects, big projects. Um, I didn't want to make this video too long because we've all got work to go do. So, on that note, we're trying to grow this channel into something unique, fun, and just a place to hang out. So if you can, hang out with us. Smash that like button, subscribe. We can't do this without you. If you want to see anything on our video or talk about anything in the shop, drop us a comment. Other than that, until next time, get back to work.